Sciencemancy on death? I can do one of those, though I don't actually believe in death anymore, as I will illustrate with the Walt Whitman quote that I will end this video with. But for now, you have good timing because I just read this article about how we define death in the US and the politics of how that might be changing. Up until the 1950s, we had a pretty clear way to define death because there was a stop of both heart function and respiratory function, and those were intertwined. But then modern ventilators came along and people could keep on going when before they would have been considered dead. Then in the 1960s, brain scanning technology improved and realized that definition wasn't good enough. But it took until 1981 that a law committee came up with the Uniform Determination of Death Act. And this became a model law that stated that a person could be considered dead when there is irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory function or of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem. This would not include people who are in a coma or have unresponsive wakefulness syndrome or locked-in syndrome, because they're not brain dead. But then this became a political issue as some parents started to challenge this for their children. Especially the case of Jahi McMath is centered in this article. And according to that girl's mother and their doctors, there was a small amount of brain activity in her hypothalamus because that has a separate blood supply going on. So technically there was something going on in that brain, even though it didn't appear this little girl's ever going to wake up again. So clinicians started to call for this law to change and to become more clear. And so other countries like the United Kingdom and India define brain death as just looking at the brain stem, which is much easier to study. But here in the US, as they're in the process of changing this law, it looks like they're just going to be doing small tweaks. The Uniform Law Committee, who's in charge of this, doesn't seem like they want to do a giant change. And so some clinicians are calling for the law to change from permanent loss of brain and heart function instead of irreversible, because it's much easier to prove permanent than irreversible. As you can imagine, those longer tests to prove irreversibility gives time for the organs to die, and this would have a knockdown effect on the 100,000 people waiting for organ transplants in the US. Interestingly, hospitals don't have to go with that law. David Greer in 2016 reviewed 500 different hospitals' policies and found a wide range of what they considered death. So the word on the street is more and more clinicians are fearful about this new change to law that's going to make things worse. And one of the big concerns is that people on this law committee are all attorneys. There isn't one practicing doctor there who deals with brain death. One of the commissioners is even a big anti-abortion proponent. And so they're talking about having bracketed recommendations where different states can include or not include this portion of the death definition depending on what they feel like is moral or medically correct. So we don't know what the future will hold here. The final vote is this summer if they're going to make any changes to the Uniform Determination of Death Act. And as our great captain stated, all goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier.